Max, thank you so much for joining me here. I really appreciate you sitting down. Saturday before the primary. It's a big weekend for you guys, I'm sure. But appreciate you taking the time to sit down and go over some issues again. We sat down last year, probably about a year ago, right?
About a year ago.
Yeah.
It went by quickly, I'll say that.
So in that year, there's been a lot going on with this campaign, a number of different primary challengers, forums, everything that's going on. Just your brief takeaway from a year out. What are you have you seen across the district? What's your takeaway?
I've been doing this for it's over a year, 13 months or so. I see a lot of people suffering, and they trust me with their struggles, and they really deserve and want someone that's going to represent them and care about them. And I recognize that as a tremendous responsibility, but that's really what I want to do. I want to be a public servant like I have throughout my life. I don't consider myself a politician, and I really think that if we want change in Washington, it's got to start with the kind of people we send. We have too many special interests chasing these campaigns around, and too much money, and it's got a corrosive effect on what we're doing for our government, and it's not good.
Mm-hmm. So in your travels across the district, I'm sure you've met a lot of people, heard a lot of different stories, topics, areas of concern for people. What do you think, it's hard to pick, of course, but what do you think is the most pressing issue facing this district right now?
It's hard. It really is hard to pick, and I don't think it's fair to pick, because if it's your issue, certainly veterans affairs are of concern. People are struggling that can't get care or have contracted, cancers and all types of things with relation to Agent Orange. Talked to some folks about that, but really economic opportunity is huge. People are seeing their jobs going elsewhere, and it's a challenge, between robotics, globalism, and automation. We're really facing some challenges, but we need a coherent economic policy as a nation, and we don't have one right now. And certainly, probably the most frequently brought up issue is access to good health care for families, and it's creating so much, regardless of who you are. If it's someone that is nearing retirement, they're afraid of retiring at a certain point because they're not sure what their medical costs are going to be. If you'd like to start a small business, you're afraid to do that without medical care. When kids need things, I talked to some rather elderly folks, and the one person, the husband, was very adamant that he'd like people to pay their own way. And I said, well, what are you referring to? And he said, like health care and that. He said, I've always paid my own way. And it's ironic that his wife said, can I say something about this? She said, she actually said it 3 times, and finally he just waved his hand and said, yeah, go ahead. She said, I know something about health care. I spent 43 years as a nurse in a hospital. And she said, she looked at her husband and said, do you remember when our son had an ear infection and we didn't have $10 to take him to the doctor, and to this day he has a hearing loss? Is that the kind of society you want to live in? It's a pretty poignant argument. I'm not sure she convinced her husband, and I'm not sure what goes on between them, but it does show that some families are split. But I believe it's more humane, and I don't know anyone who says, that Medicare, when I get to be 65, I don't even want it. I've never met anybody like that. We need Medicare for all, and I think that's the really humanitarian way of approaching this issue. It's not a handout, something that everybody invests in, and it's really the right way to do it.
I want to dig into healthcare a little bit.
Okay.
You mentioned Medicare for all, single payer.
Yes.
Big discussion, especially in New York, where we've had New York Health Act come up in the state legislature level. Now, what do you think about the federal level? Is that possible in the near future?
I absolutely do. I believe the experience that people had with Affordable Care Act, they realized that it wasn't sustainable. There are lots of things done on both sides that really made it untenable.
At this point, what do you think about the Affordable Care Act as it stands today?
Well, one thing that injured it quite a bit is when they took away the mandate, because healthy folks, they just soon put the money in their pocket as opposed to being in the pool. And the pools, if we're going to spread out risk, we really need to have the largest pool possible. So there are several things happening simultaneously. The cynical side of me says that there was an effort to actually increase the uncertainty surrounding the program. And what that did is drove the premiums up and the deductibles up, so that now it's very expensive and it doesn't provide the coverage that everybody needs.
So if you were in the House today or tomorrow, if you were elected, would you rather push for a single payer plan?
Absolutely.
Or would you try to make some compromises to edit, change, add to the ACA?
Well, certainly the way
and that doesn't have to be mutually exclusive.
Yeah, right. Yeah. My preference would be for Medicare for all, and here's why. Every third premium dollar, every $3 you spend on commercial insurance, one of those dollars is used for administration. And that's 30%, and 33% if you want to be really technical, public math. But really, that's opposed to 3% for Medicare. And Medicare has a formulary. It has an administrative process. It has doctors that take it. And I think that we already spend too much for health care in this country, and we have bad outcomes compared to the other nations. We're literally, out of 21 democracies, our health outcomes are 20th. It's an embarrassment, particularly when you consider that we spend on average 2.4 times the amount that all the other industrial countries that have universal health care of some type pay. So, and that's approximately almost $10,000 per person, every man, woman, and child in the country.
If you had the option to make one compromise to fix the ACA as it is, whether looking at different aspects of health coverage, what have people across the district told you, and what would you try to prioritize as one small fix as part of the program?
Well, it needs more than small fixes. There are several things I would do, but let me just throw out a couple. First of all, special interests, I think, made it possible to not compete these programs across state lines. That harmed it. It would have been more competitive to do it elsewhere, a different way. Certainly, if you can get more people into the pool, it becomes more manageable and more sustainable. The uncertainty issue is really something that is very difficult to correct now, because you can't predict even what's going to happen. But there are people, there are over 60,000 people in this district that without the Affordable Care Act, they were going to lose all their health care. And people, with the pre-existing conditions and all those things, it's something whose time has come, I believe. And I think that there will be enough people that are sent to Washington in 2018 that there is absolutely hope for this, and I think it's a good idea.
Now I want to ask you something. There's a lot of talk around this blue wave, a possible Democratic takeover of the House, and along with that, kind of an asterisk that has been a part of that discussion is Leader Pelosi. I think you've been asked before, but I just want to reiterate: what are your thoughts on Leader Pelosi? If you ended up in the House, do you think you would end up casting a favorable ballot for her as Speaker if Democrats were to take the House?
She's provided leadership for a long time. and I respect the things, you know, some of the things that she's done for the party. But quite frankly, I think it would be premature and inappropriate to say who I would vote for when I don't even know who else is running. Mm-hmm. So I think that I would like to see someone that might reflect a leader that more closely reflects my district. Mm-hmm. You know, rural and people that have needs for economic opportunity expansion, and someone who's going to advocate for infrastructure improvements that we so much need.
So would you say you see a shift kind of in the Democratic Party, and maybe our leadership should, the Democrats' leadership should change to reflect that?
I do. Okay. I do. You know, I'm not predisposing to any particular person, mm-hmm. but it's only reasonable that when there's a big change, that we actually look to wherever we can find good leaders, mm-hmm. and I would be hesitant to say I'm going to vote for any particular person before I find out who it is.
Mm-hmm. You're a politician already.
Well, yikes! Let's hope not.
No. All right. I want to move on. You mentioned earlier a lot of impoverished areas across the district, and one thing that the Congressman Tom Reed is kind of touting right now, especially in those areas, is tax reform. Do you agree,
wow.
looking at this a few months down the road, or after the fact, do you agree the tax reform in the immediate sense has had a positive effect on families across the district?
You know, it was certainly touted as being a great boon to the middle class, but I think it's inaccurate, it's misleading, and I feel that I'm not here to take away someone's tax relief, but I'd like to make it permanent. And they didn't make it permanent on purpose. These little benefits that were given to the middle class were just kind of doled out with the expectation that in a very near future, they're not going to be there. And it's no accident that it was $1.5 trillion because of deficit spending, because anything more than that, and it would have required a supermajority to pass it. Mm-hmm. So this is all calculated, and it's all, you know, what really strikes me as being dishonest, really. Representative Collins posted on social media that his donors called him and said, you know, if you don't pass this tax reform package, do not call me back, because we're not going to give you any money. So when you relate something as directly as that to a particular outcome with legislation, how is that different from a bribe? Mm-hmm. How is that? It is a corrosive effect on our process that is not right, and I don't agree with it. So this is something that Tom Reed is all about. It's literally a payoff, and what's even worse, and it really reflects that this is a plan all along, because less than 48 hours after passing this legislation, Speaker Ryan did what? He said, we're going to probably have to start cutting social programs to actually pay for this tax reform package. Mm-hmm. So that's pretty disgusting.
In a general sense, tax reform, do you agree with the lowering taxes, though, across the board? What do you think?
I would not say that
not
that's
across
exact,
the board.
because people should pay their fair share, and there are certain people in certain tax brackets that are paying less than ever, based on and literally when 1% and corporations get 87% of a $1.5 trillion giveaway, and the other 99% of taxpayers get 13%. That's pretty. I can't believe that Tom Reed would say that that's a fair deal for the 23rd district, because I venture to say there are not too many people in that upper 1% in this district.
Now looking at Congress right now, Congress wants to try and cut back on its spending. The President is sending over rescissions packages, which just got killed in the Senate. But at this point, tax reform has been passed. How does Congress address the budgetary situation to try and rein in fiscal spending, but also keep those programs? What are some areas you see where there may have to be cuts in the future?
Well, I think, first of all, I think some of that should be reversed. I'm not saying I'm going to take away the middle class tax relief, but I would like to make it permanent. And I would like everyone to pay a fair share for what needs to be spent to run our government. And I don't think that's currently what's happening.
Mm-hmm. Now I want to transition agriculture.
Oh.
It's a big topic, especially within the district,
Yes.
especially our dairy farmers.
Yes.
Looking at agri-policy and especially dairy policy, what kind of input have you been receiving across the district on that issue?
That's a great question.
What are some ideas you would take to Congress to try and help some of the struggling dairy farmers in the district?
That's a good question. Right now, it's a global product. Dairy is a global product. A lot of it is sold as dry milk, but it costs about $17 to $18 every hundredweight for a hundredweight of milk. But recently the prices are $12.26, $12.36, $12.43, somewhere in that neighborhood. So unless you have a family farm where your family is who is working on that farm, you really struggle to make a living. So that's a problem because it takes a lot of investment to run a dairy farm. And once we lose our small farms, they're gone. So how can we help them? First of all, I would say because the price is global, there's not much you can do there, but there's kind of a joke, and I don't mean to take this lightly, when a dairy farmer, when the prices are low, he tries to produce more, and when the prices are high, he tries to produce more. So a dairy farmer told me that joke. But the point is, the ability to affect that cost, there are ways of doing that that I think would be much better for the dairy farmer. And I think we need to explore those.
What are some ideas of those that you've heard?
So if, like based on someone's production, we could set up a production where you would get a certain amount. You could still sell the rest on the market, whatever it happens to be. But then it becomes, it stabilizes what people receive, and it also, it doesn't take out capitalism or economic incentives or whatever, but it does stabilize it so it's not so volatile.
So more of a quota kind of system?
Yes.
Like Europe?
Yes. But I mean, I'm not here to tell dairy farmers what they need, but I am here to listen to dairy farmers and find out how I can help them succeed. And that's very important. The other thing, and this is kind of a small example, when they do have a year where they actually make a profit, it would be nice for them to have an option to say, $1 million, I'm just throwing that out, $1 million worth of equipment. Say they want to automize or kind of mechanize their dairy process, milking machines and so forth, and they have $1 million worth of investment that would make them more competitive and allow them, so if you could take that $1 million, spend it, and amortize it in a single year or something that's advantageous, it's not required, but an option for that farmer, it would allow him or her to do that, become more competitive, and kind of plow things back into the business to the benefit of his long-term viability. Does that make sense?
Yes. I want to pause here and check our
Sure.
video. One of the last interviews that shut off in the middle of the
Okay.
filming, and I forgot to turn around our flip screen, so I'll just splice that right there.
Okay, sounds good.
So another topic I wanted to touch on was immigration, especially in the last week over the family separation and zero tolerance policy discussions at the border and in Congress, still working on legislation in that sense. Across the district, a lot of different effects and a lot of different facets to the immigration issue.
Sure.
Where do you see as one of the most important of those impacts of immigration policy within the district, and what would you do to kind of address that on the national stage?
You know, we're talking about in the district. That's the question.
Yes.
I think I can't go beyond, I can't go right there until I acknowledge the fact that it's embarrassing and really it saddens me to see people use children as pawns in this big political fight about immigration. Our default position should really be making sure that families stay together. You know, some of these decisions take time, and to take a child out of the arms of a mother it's cruel, and it's not something that I look at America and say that's what it should stand for. Mm-hmm. So that should be the default position, and they should be as rapidly as possible changing that. But we really need political courage on the part of our representatives to care less about getting reelected and more about taking stands where appropriate, and I want to do that. So let's get back to the question you asked. Immigration is a very big issue. The way it touches this district specifically is we need a consistent source of labor. And we do have a work visa program, but from what I'm hearing, it isn't streamlined enough, number one. Number two, sometimes you don't get the approval for your application until after the need has gone beyond. So literally a month and a half or 2 months after you need to have those workers come in and tie your vines at the vineyards, for example, you're already beyond that. So you're risking loss of product. So we need that consistency. We need to streamline it so it works for the people who need it. And that's a real, I mean, it literally is the viability of those farms. Secondly, when you look at dairy farms particularly, that seasonal concept of migrant workers doesn't work. There are many workers that would come here for 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, work on a dairy farm, send money home or save money to go back and actually start their own dairy farm or retire, I'm not sure. But that is something that's absolutely critical to the success of our dairy farmers, because right now it's 10 months and it doesn't work for them. Excuse me.
That's fine, I'll splice that.
I get a little tickle in my throat.
No,
sorry,
that's fine. That's
apologize.
fine. Okay, another topic, Second Amendment. So, I mean, within the course of this primary alone, Parkland, Las Vegas, as well
absolutely.
as just a continuing issue in every day.
You know, as
places across America.
Right.
Now, you have previously stated, and the Reid campaign called you out on what they call a flip-flop. Could you address just firmly where you stand on the Second Amendment?
Absolutely. I'm not sure where they get the flip-flop idea. It's really a stretch, but there is a consistent way of dealing with political campaigns. I certainly hope that they have a renewed interest in following the truth, and if that's the shift in their strategy, that's great. But let me tell you, I started this thing at the beginning. I took an oath to support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. And special interests are a domestic threat to the Constitution. And I made that very clear. Now at the Ithaca, what was it, a debate?
The forum.
The forum. And it was just on Thursday night. someone said, one of the candidates said to get an applause line, said that we should eliminate and outlaw the NRA, and I said, no, absolutely not. It's kind of like the old saying, it's kind of a quote of Voltaire. I may disagree with what you say, but I'll defend to the death your right to say it. And that's part of what a military person does. They write that check, that blank check, to defend their country, and that includes the First Amendment, to say what an American wants to say. So I think that the NRA has a perfect right to say whatever they want. The concern I have is really about the money in politics. That's what the special interest, and quite frankly, ironically, Tom Reed took the same oath I took when I was 17 at the Air Force Academy, but he doesn't look at special interest as any threat. In fact, he looks at them as someone that allows him to remain in power and get reelected. And I think we need to change campaign finance to reflect what people want. I think my feeling is my country's not for sale, and neither am I. And I would like Tom Reed to actually take that stand as well.
Now, what is your stance on Second Amendment policy?
Okay. Yes.
As it is.
As it is.
Assault rifle bans,
okay.
Carry permits, things of that nature.
Sure. So certainly I think we need to get all stakeholders together and actually do the hard work of open, honest, and respectful dialogue and come to solutions through compromise that work to balance that Second Amendment right that I took an oath to support and defend as well. To make sure that quite frankly, I don't have any problem with someone who wants to hunt or wants to defend their home with a weapon. That is part of the Second Amendment. However, it's not an unlimited right. So, what the solutions ultimately are, I'm not here to get somebody's guns. I'm really not.
Do you support banning assault rifles?
It's interesting. I do not. Here's the deal. I mean, if you look at the carnage has to stop, and we need to do what we can to make it stop. And we have an obligation as citizens and also as congressional representatives to do that work. It's hard work because people don't all agree. So whether it's having a background check that has no exceptions for personal sales, internet sales, or gun shows, and it should be national, and we should exchange information across state lines, because someone that, say, is on the no-fly list, someone that would use our freedom to make us less safe, we need to have a way to connect the dots and prevent them from carnage.
So the House brought up a measure, Fix NICS, or there's currently a House measure, Fix NICS, which would expand the NICS background check system on the federal level in cooperation between all the states, but also attached to that bill was concealed carry reciprocity across state lines. So in a situation like that, is that something you would compromise on or no?
That is a great example of the poison pill. So there are several things that are done legislatively that really make it difficult for people to understand where their congressman is coming from. And that's a perfect example.
If the House brought up a compromise, Second Amendment, firearms control piece of legislation, would you be willing to perhaps what some would argue would be sacrificing a little bit of Second Amendment rights to adopt a piece of safety legislation or something of that nature? Would you be able to, or would you be willing to consider something that both sides, Democrats and Republicans, give and take on? Absolutely.
Give and take makes perfect sense. And I think we're way too polarized right now. However, when the devil's in the details, right? You need to actually bargain in good faith and make compromises that are real. So for me to accept what you were talking about earlier, about a concealed carry option that would require us, in the state of New York, for example, to accept a concealed carry from a state that has no concealed carry requirements, is absurd. It's like a rush to the bottom. What I would consider, I don't think this would hurt us as a country, and it would probably help us if we actually had some requirements before we'd accept one from another state. In other words, the devil's in the details again, but if you list things that are required before we would accept a concealed carry permit from another state, you know, if all the states have similar, and we can do that, and that makes much more sense than to say, whatever if you don't even want to have them, we'll just accept it, no problem. It makes no sense.
You would be comfortable coming back to your constituents in the district and saying, look, I gave up to some of the more Democratic, the left-leaning voters, hey, I gave up this to compromise to get another measure. Whatever it may be, you wouldn't be afraid to face both sides, because it is such a polarizing issue.
Sure.
You wouldn't be afraid to face both sides of the constituency and say, I gave a little bit on either side here.
I think what's...
Of course, it's devil in the detail.
Right.
But
without the details, I can't say this is something I would or that's something I wouldn't. That example you gave me there is not a compromise I'd be willing to take in any form. However, I think there is something in there that we could work toward, and I'm okay with doing the real work of legislating. And that's not what's been done by either party in the last several cycles, because what they attempt to do, and it's not a Republican thing only or a Democratic thing only, they say, I'm not going to bring it to the floor until I have all the votes I need to control the legislation, and then I'm just going to ram it through. And that's not helping us, because to actually achieve enduring policy, we need to work together, and we're not doing that. We can't even carry on a conversation. You know, when I worked for Center 11, they asked me, Max, could you go over to the Republican Club tomorrow and represent the office? They're having a breakfast, and they had a speaker from this is 22 years ago. They had a speaker from the administration, Clinton administration, about anti-ballistic missile policy. And at the end of it, this young military legislative assistant got up, he raised his hand, and he looked right at the guy speaking, and he pointed his finger at him. He said, you know, I've heard you speak before, and you're either stupid or you're a liar, and I don't think you're stupid. And he sat down. And I thought, wow, that's toxic. It was toxic 22 years ago. It's more toxic now. But really, if you want respect, you need to give respect. And it would be much wiser to have someone sent to Congress that has the maturity, diplomatic skills, negotiating skills, statesmanship to say the next day, you know, not engage in kind, but go back the next day and say, Vaughn, your district needs infrastructure. Mine does too. Why do we have to argue about that? Why can't we work together to do something for our constituents and for the nation and move us forward? That's the way, and that's what the American people deserve, and that's what they expect, and that's what I'll provide.
Okay, and I want to wrap up on one point. Should you not win the primary on Tuesday, would you throw your support behind whomever does receive or whoever does win the primary? And secondly, would you consider running as an independent?
I think I have made it clear right from the start, and at virtually every place this is asked, and it's been asked literally dozens of times, I will support the Democratic primary winner regardless of who it is. And I think when I say support, it isn't just like good luck. It's I will do what I can to help, because it's absolutely critically important that we restore integrity and leadership to Washington for this district. And that's got to be my first. It's not about me. It really is. It's about service, it's about the district, and it's about honest government and moving this country forward. And I'm a public servant, and that's part of service. I would not become an independent. I think that is that's destructive, and it's not me.
Just have to have you on the record on that.
Sure.
All right, that's it. Max, thank you so much for sitting down. Greatly appreciate it. I'll let you get back on the campaign trail.
My pleasure.
And it's been a pleasure working with you and all the other candidates.
Thank you very much.
Thanks so much.
Thank you, Vaughn. Appreciate it very much.